What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're taking a look at the wildcard for game week 29. So I'm going to go through some thoughts first of all about whether or not this is a good week to use the chip, and then we'll take a look at the draft itself. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Now, for most of you that haven't yet used the chip, you're probably going to be looking to use it in game weeks 29, 30 or 33. There is another week that could work as well, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but they've all got their own benefits. So if you wildcard in 29, you obviously get to maximise the double game week that's right in front of you. So if you're looking at your team thinking, I don't quite have enough double game week players, I'm not really where I'd like to be, and I don't want to take a bunch of hits, then obviously you could wildcard instead, which would also let you build towards future double game weeks. So for example, we know, including 29, that Brighton are going to double 4 times before the end of the season. Likewise, Man United are going to double 3 times. So you could triple up on players from those teams, hopefully get a bunch of extra points for game week 29, but also know that down the line they've got extra fixtures to come as well. Now obviously both of those teams will blank in 32, so you'd have to manage that or possibly use a free hit there, but it's definitely doable. The biggest disadvantage to 29 is probably for those of you that still need to bench boost, because the way the fixtures fall, your best time to bench boost would probably be game week 34, and that's a lot of time between when you wildcard and when you end up bench boosting. And if there's injuries, suspensions, players getting dropped or anything like that, then it might take a bunch of hits to get your bench boost out. But that might be worth it for what you gain outside of that, right? So that's one week you could use it. Another week is game week 30. I don't think many people are going to do this, but if your team looks great for 29, or you want to take some punts, so let's say you want to go for Jared Bowen or Danny Ings from West Ham because their fixtures are good in 29, but you don't want to hold them long term, then you could bring them in for 29, then wildcard out of it later on. Likewise, Arsenal's best fixture in the next kind of 4 to 5 game weeks is probably this week against Leeds at home. So if you didn't want to drop the players for that week, you could look to keep them for 29, then maybe wildcard, not necessarily out of all 3 of them, but maybe reduce the number of Arsenal players you've got from 30 onwards. I think you've still got the same disadvantage that if you need to bench boost, it's not until 34, and your team would have to be in a pretty good way for 29 to avoid using it this week. But it is an option. I think if you don't go in 29, most people are just going to wait for game week 33, so that lets you set up for the final 6 weeks, but also gives you the closest opportunity to be bench boosted in game week 34. So you'd wildcard in 33 to set your team up for the rest of the season, but also to set it up for the game week 34 bench boost. And also, it's not just Man United and Brighton that are going to double multiple times before the end of the season. Man City are likely to double in 34 and 37. Now, most people that have wildcarded early, like 26, 27, 28, 29, the one Man City player they've probably got or are planning to get back is Haaland. So to get up to 2 or 3 Man City players becomes a little bit more difficult. And given how much Pep chops and changes things, you almost want to make the decision on other players as close to the time that you need to do it as possible. So by game week 33, what if Man City are out of the Champions League? What if the injury to, I don't know, like a Grealish means that Foden's going to play a lot more? I know Foden might be out for a while. We'll have to wait and see. But it's just an example, right? What if Mahrez is suddenly nailed? Well, you can get a player in quite easy on that wild card, whereas other people might struggle to do that, right? It doesn't mean that wildcard 33 is obvious, because you might get to 33 and just end up wildcarding into a team that most other people have anyway, but there are some advantages to waiting. So if your team looks great for 29 and there's no major advantage to wildcarding in 30 instead, then you might as well just save it for 33. The other week that could work is game week 34, but only really for people that don't have a bench boost or a triple captain or something like that to use, because if you do, you don't want to block getting to use that chip in game week 34 itself, because you can only use one chip in any given game week. But for those of you that have used all your other chips and you just have the wild card, then you could use it in 34, because again, you'd be wild carding closer to the double game weeks itself. So they are probably the 3 main weeks that people would look to use it. 29 is fine depending on what your team looks like now. Otherwise, you're probably saving it till 33. Just quickly for the rest of the video, if your basically the draft that I've set up is kind of taking into account that you're not free hitting in 32, but if you are wildcarding this week and free hitting in game week 32, you could probably afford to start with less Arsenal and Liverpool players and maybe go for more from Chelsea and Man City, because we know in 32, Chelsea, Brighton, Man United and Man City are all going to blank. But if you've got your free hit, you can maybe set your wild card up slightly differently. But I'll talk about that as we go. All right, let's take a look at the draft. And I want to talk about a couple of things people might point out first of all. So you might have noticed I've got minus 0.1 million in the bank. That means that I can't actually quite afford this draft. And I wouldn't usually put a squad together that I can't afford, but it's so close to where I'd want to be. I wanted to discuss it anyway. Plus, some of you might have higher team value, and there's a few players that I could look to downgrade if I needed extra cash. So that's why that is how it is. The other thing is Erling Haaland on the bench. Now, we don't know if he's going to be fit for the Liverpool game at the time of recording. We'll have to wait and see what Pep Guardiola says in his press conference. For what it's worth, I'll be very surprised if he doesn't play in that game. But either way, he's someone that most people are going to want long term. So it's just easier to include him from the start rather than have to use a transfer on him later on. So unless Pep says he's out for weeks, I would just include him. Obviously, if you want to put him in the 11, that's absolutely what you should do. But that's why he's on the bench for me, because I'd want to go for 11 double game weekers. Now in goal, I've gone for De Gea because he's a pretty safe pick for Man United that should play every single game for the rest of the season. Man United not only have 3 double game weeks, but also some pretty good single game weeks as well. You could look to go for someone like Luke Shaw, but if it gets later on in the season and Man United is still in Europa League and top 4 isn't secure but looks pretty good, then you might see Malacia play the odd league game. That's the only thing I'd be worried about with Shaw. For what it's worth, I'm probably going to buy him, so I'm not that worried. But I think if I was playing it absolutely safe, I would go for De Gea instead. And because Man United's fixtures are so good, you only need your bench goalkeeper for Game Week 32 if you're not free hitting, because De Gea will blank, and for Game Week 34 if you're bench boosting. And Everson has fixtures in both of those weeks, and he's very cheap. Now, if you're looking at that squad and thinking, well, I've got more money to spend, then even someone like Raya has Villa at home in 32 and Nottingham Forest at home in 34. He would be a better option than Everson. Essentially, if you're going for De Gea, you just need a good goalkeeper in 32 and 34. And if you're free hitting in 32, you don't even need a goalkeeper for that week. So they're the things to think about. If you are going to free hit in Game Week 32, you could look at different goalkeepers completely. If you've got the cash, maybe Edison and Kepa, they are the 2 goalkeepers that I'm aiming for, because Kepa's got a double this week. Edison has one in 34 and probably 37. And they just rotate pretty nicely with the single game week fixtures as well. It is way more expensive than De Gea and Everson, but something worth considering. In defence, I've gone for double Newcastle with Trippier and Botman, even though I'm benching Botman this week. And the reason for that is Newcastle still have that fixture against Brighton to rearrange. And there's lots of talk between the fixture gurus that it could go into 36. So that would be Leeds away and Brighton at home. It just seems pretty handy to have a cheap nailed defender on your bench right now that you can just carry all the way through. And Newcastle do have some fixtures where you wouldn't mind having to play Botman if you needed to. So Brentford away and Villa away in 30 and 31. Everton away in 33. They've got a fixture in 32 as well if you're not free hitting. Southampton at home in 34, etc. It's not the worst player to kind of have on the bench. And for most weeks outside of the double, you're going to play Trent, Trippier plus one of the other 3, Dunk, Botman or White anyway, so you don't have to play Botman every week, and Trippier kind of speaks for himself. With Dunk, I would want triple Brighton, and I don't think I would want triple Brighton attack, because Evan Ferguson looks great. I just think he's likely to come off early, and there might be some games where he doesn't start. And I just think triple midfield takes up one too many spots for me. So it would have to be a defender or a goalkeeper. You could risk steal if you wanted to, bearing in mind they do blank in Game Week 32. But Dunk is the safest pick, right? And I've got Estepinian for my own team. And if Estepinian and Dunk play the same amount of minutes from now until the end of the season, I would definitely bet on Estepinian scoring more points. But I am slightly worried at times he might be benched, right? Just because of the role he plays. Whereas you know that Dunk is going to play every single game, and Estepinian is travelling to Australia over the break, so I just don't know if it's worth the risk when you can just get Dunk, who you know is going to play every game and has 4 double game weeks. So it's a boring pick, don't get me wrong, but you could look to go for him instead. Obviously, if you're going for a free hit in 32 and you're going for De Gea, you're going for Kepa and Edison, you could look to go for Luke Shaw instead of one of your defenders, either Dunk, Botman or Ben White. But that's why I've picked those 3. Obviously, I'd love to have Gabriel instead of Ben White, but with Tomiyasu out Ben White's position is pretty much nailed now. There shouldn't be that odd game where he misses, and he's a lot cheaper. You're not necessarily going to play an Arsenal defender that much, but they have got some pretty good fixtures towards the end of the season, and their defence is so good that if you had to rely on him, it wouldn't be the worst thing. Plus, he gets forward as well. Trent obviously has a really bad double, but he is a pick where you're kind of thinking ahead, right? So if we just come on to a Liverpool player here, even in Game Week 30, it's not that easy, Arsenal at home, but then it's Leeds away. If you're not free hitting in 32, they've got Nottingham Forest at home. Game Week 34, West Ham away, not that bad. Then it's the double in 34, and the rest of the fixtures for Liverpool, even though they don't have any doubles after 34, are pretty good. So that is a long-term pick. Like I said at the start, if you are free hitting in 32, you can afford to go with less Liverpool and Arsenal players because you'll be able to get them in for their good fixtures in Game Week 32 anyway, and you could look to use transfers on Liverpool players later on. But if you don't have that free hit, I'd rather just do it now and get him in place, even if the double is not that great this week. But if you didn't want to go for him, you could look at someone like Luke Shaw, like I've said, if you've got the spare Man United slot, or someone like Ben Chilwell for Chelsea, who's got 2 home fixtures in the double against Aston Villa and Liverpool. All right, let's look at the midfield, and I do think I've talked about these 5 players quite a lot recently, so I'll try and cover it quickly. Essentially, I would want that triple up on Brighton because of the extra fixtures they've got before the end of the season. I've already picked Dunk, so I need to go for 2 attackers. Evan Ferguson as a forward is not a bad option. I'm just slightly more concerned about his minutes versus any of the midfielders that we'll be looking to pick. So I've gone for March and Matoma, mostly because they're already in my team, and March is a little bit cheaper in a draft where I'm already struggling for cash. But if McAllister keeps playing as a number 10, which does look pretty likely, you could even make an argument that he is the best Brighton option to go for, given that he's also first choice penalty taker. So if you want to go for him and Matoma, or him and March instead, that is perfectly fine. Just pick 2 of the 3 and you're hopefully golden for the rest of the season. With Man United, again, I would want that triple up. Rashford and Fernandes are the most nailed on attackers, so they are 2 pretty easy picks as well. I guess the one player that's not here is Saka. Now, if you're not free hitting in Game Week 32, you could make an argument to just include him from the start instead of one of Fernandes and Salah. But it gets a bit tricky because fixture-wise, it makes sense to drop Salah and keep Fernandes and just go for Saka right now and then bring Salah in later on. But Salah also plays in Game Week 32, so if you're not free hitting that week, it might make more sense to either do Fernandes to Saka before Game Week 32 and just go for Fernandes now for the double, or just start with Saka and Salah and just not go for Fernandes right now. And it's all dependent on what you're doing in 32. If you are free hitting that week, I would just start with Salah and Fernandes and just get Saka later on, even though I know he's just done really well against Palace and has a good single game week fixture this week, and he's also done really well for England during the international break. I think if I was on Wildcard, I would just take that risk to go without. And as you can see, I've only got one Arsenal player here. And with Salah, I know the fixtures in Game Week 29 are pretty bad, but he's still at least got 2 of them, even though Liverpool haven't necessarily done well in away games. I just think he is someone you're going to want in kind of future weeks, given the fixtures that they've got. And also, there's kind of reports this week that Luis Diaz is going to be back in full training. So then you've got Diaz, Jota, Firmino and Nunez for 4 spots. You're not going to know who's going to get the most minutes every week, whereas you know Salah is going to play every single game. So if you can afford him, after, even from Game Week 30, look, Arsenal home is not great, but it's not like Saka away to Liverpool is that much better either. And then the fixtures after that are just pretty damn good for the rest of the season, especially with the double in 34. So if you've got the cash, I would just go for him. So I'm pretty sure that's the midfield I'd go for. If you wanted to put Saka in, you absolutely could. And then up front, alongside Haaland, I've gone for Watkins and Isak. Now, I know that Villa's double in 29 is not necessarily ideal, having to go away from home twice, one of them against Chelsea. But the reason I've picked Watkins, because he's absolutely nailed on, his minutes are good, he's first choice penalty taker, and he plays in Game Week 32. So if you're not looking to free hit that week, you've got the double in 29, they play Nottingham Forest at home in 30, Newcastle in 31, then they've got that fixture in 32 against Brentford, and they come straight back to Fulham at home in 33. So Watkins is someone you wouldn't necessarily need to worry about until 34 onwards, where you could use him to upgrade other players that have a double that week. So even though the double in 34 itself is not... the double in 29 itself is not great. I still like him as a pick. If you are free hitting in 32, you could look to go for someone like Havertz instead if you've got the money to go there, because obviously Chelsea have got the 2 home fixtures in game week 29 against Villa and Liverpool. So he might be a slightly better pick, but if you're not free hitting in 32, I still like Watkins. Likewise with Isak, there's a hope there that because he's playing so well, he would just keep his place in that team. When Wilson isn't on the pitch, Isak is, or looks to be, first choice penalty taker, and Newcastle also play in game week 32. And you probably say they've got a slightly better double than Aston Villa as well. And I've kind of spoken about Newcastle players quite a lot already, but if you're bench boosting in 34, then Trippier, Botman and Isak wouldn't be the worst bench, even though they're just single game week players. And a lot of the single game week fixtures outside of that are kind of okay. So Spurs at home, who knows how they'll perform without Conte now. He's not at the club anymore. But I don't think if you got to 32 without a free hit that you'd be worried too much about having to play Isak, as long as he's still got his place, which looks pretty likely. So I like both of those picks. I think if you're trying to cut money from this team because you don't quite have enough money for the draft, then going for Solanke up front with 2 good home fixtures in 29 that you could then bench most weeks, but is also absolutely nailed on first choice penalty taker. If you need to rely on him at some point, you could. He's only 5.5 million, so you could drop Watkins or Isak to him to get a bit more money in the bank. Obviously, if you're very close like I am, minus 0.1, you could go from Trent to Robertson or someone like that instead, maybe even Van Dijk, who's going to start every single game. But for the most part, if I had the cash, this is pretty much what I would go for. There's not really too many downgrades that I would want to make. I think if I was free hitting in 32, I'd be very tempted to switch goalkeepers, but you might need to fund that by selling other players. So it could be Trent to Chilwell, Watkins or Isak to Solanke to be able to afford those different goalkeepers. But ultimately, it'd be something like that. Let me know in the comments below, are you wildcarding this week and how similar is your draft? If you've enjoyed that video, give it a like. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. And I'll catch you again tomorrow.